The sun blazed down on the crowded city streets as the parade marched forward. Officer Daniels stood stiffly in formation, sweat dripping down his back. His hands clenched into fists as the command rang out, "Salute!" He raised his hand to his forehead, his heart pounding. The man standing before him, now a decorated war hero, met his gaze with a knowing smile. Daniel's stomach twisted. Just 2 weeks ago, he had laughed at this same man, mocking him as a filthy beggar. Now, under the eyes of the city, he had no choice but to salute the man he had humiliated. Officer Daniels yawned as he patrolled the nearly empty city park. The streets were quiet, the usual drunks and troublemakers either gone or passed out in alleys. Then his flashlight flickered over a worn bench. A bundle of ragged blankets shifted. "Well, well," Daniels muttered, tapping the bench with his baton. "Park's closed, old man." A gaunt face emerged from the blankets. The man's deep-set eyes held no fear, just quiet composure. "I won't be here much longer," he said simply, standing with slow, deliberate movements. Daniels smirked. "Yeah? Finally getting a job?" The man said nothing, just pulled his coat tighter and walked away. Daniels chuckled, shaking his head. "What a joke," he muttered. He didn't notice how straight the man's posture was, how his steps were precise, almost rehearsed. He didn't wonder what had put him on that bench. As the man disappeared into the night, Daniels turned back to his patrol, oblivious that his careless words would soon haunt him, and that the man he had laughed at would soon stand before him, commanding not his mockery, but his respect. James Carter had once worn a uniform with pride. A decorated officer, he had led missions in dangerous territories, earning the trust of his men. Then came the mission that changed everything. Captured behind enemy lines, he endured years of brutal captivity. Starved, beaten, and left for dead, Carter survived through sheer will. He had memorized every inch of his cell, every creak in the walls. He had counted every second until freedom. When rescue finally came, it should have been a victory. Instead, he returned to find his world in ruins. His wife had remarried, assuming him dead. His house was long gone. The government, slow and indifferent, buried him in red tape. No job, no home, no family. Just a name on old military reports. He wandered from shelter to shelter, his medals tucked in his bag, a reminder of a life that now felt like a distant dream. And so, the soldier who had once commanded squads now slept on park benches, ignored by the city he had fought for. Until one night, a cop with a sneer and a baton shattered the last illusion of dignity he had left. Life on the streets was a battle Carter never trained for. Cold nights gnawed at his bones. Hunger was a familiar ache. The looks of disgust from passers-by hurt in ways he never admitted. The city had no place for broken men. He applied for veterans' assistance, but bureaucracy moved slower than starvation. Each day he checked for updates, another form, another delay. Yet he refused to beg. He refused to let the world strip him of what little he had left, his pride. One night, as rain poured down, he found shelter under a store awning. People walked by without a glance, until a teenage girl hesitated. She offered a sandwich, her eyes filled with quiet kindness. "Thank you," he said, meaning it. That small act reminded him that humanity still existed, and soon fate would remind the world of who he was. Carter had almost stopped hoping. The endless waiting, the cold nights, the hunger, it all blurred into one exhausting fight for survival. Then, one morning, as he sat outside a library using their free Wi-Fi, his phone, his last valuable possession, vibrated. "Major Carter?" The voice on the other end was cautious, uncertain. Carter's breath caught. He hadn't heard his rank in years. "Speaking." The man introduced himself as Captain Reynolds, an old military contact. "We've been trying to track you down. Your service record has been fully reviewed. The Department of Veterans Affairs has officially reinstated your benefits. You'll be receiving back pay, housing assistance, and there's one more thing." Carter's hands trembled. "What?" "The city is honoring returning veterans next week. They want you front and center. You're one of the last POWs to come home. They want to celebrate you." Carter leaned back, the weight of it settling in. After years of being invisible, forgotten, mocked, he was suddenly important again. Reynolds continued, "The mayor himself will be there, and the police force is required to salute all veterans in attendance." Carter's lips curled into a knowing smile. He thought of the cop from the park. This was going to be interesting. Officer Daniels slouched in the break room, half listening to the news playing on the station's TV. "Next week, the city will honor war hero Major James Carter in a parade celebrating returning veterans." Daniels barely glanced up. until a familiar face flashed across the screen. He froze. The man standing in front of a podium, shaking hands with officials, was him, the homeless man from the park. Daniel's stomach dropped. "No way," he muttered. His partner, Officer Miller, nudged him. "You hear about this guy? Spent years as a POW. Lost everything when he got back. Hell of a story." Daniel swallowed hard. "Yeah, hell of a story," Miller chuckled. "The whole department's assigned to the event. We have to salute all the vets." Daniel's palms felt clammy. He had humiliated this man, laughed at him, and now, in front of the entire city, he'd have to salute him. That night, Daniels barely slept. For the first time in a long time, he questioned himself. How many people had he judged without knowing their story? And more importantly, what would Carter do when he saw him again? The morning of the parade, the streets overflowed with people waving flags and cheering. Veterans in uniform marched proudly, their medals gleaming in the sunlight. Officer Daniels stood in formation with his unit, his pulse hammering in his ears. Then the announcer's voice echoed through the speakers. "And now, please welcome Major James Carter." The crowd erupted in applause. Daniels lifted his gaze, and there he was. Carter walked confidently down the street, no longer the broken man Daniels had seen on the bench. His uniform was immaculate, his posture strong, his presence commanding. Daniel's throat went dry. He could feel Carter's gaze searching the line of officers, looking for him. He felt exposed, guilty, ashamed. The command rang out. "Salute!" Daniel's hand snapped to his forehead automatically. The moment stretched, unbearable. Then Carter's eyes locked onto his, and he smiled. Not a smug, victorious grin, just a quiet, knowing smile. Daniels felt his chest tighten. He had expected anger, humiliation, maybe even revenge, but Carter was giving him something else entirely: forgiveness. As Carter passed, Daniels couldn't tear his eyes away. The weight of his mockery, his arrogance, crushed down on him. Carter had every reason to expose him, to call him out in front of everyone. Instead, he had simply smiled. Daniels felt something shift inside him. After the ceremony, as the officers were dismissed, Daniels hesitated. Then, before he could lose his nerve, he pushed through the crowd. "Major Carter!" he called. Carter turned. The expression on his face was unreadable. Daniels swallowed hard. I don't know if you remember me, but—" "I remember," Carter said, his voice calm. Daniel's face burned. I was wrong, about everything, and I'm sorry." Carter studied him for a long moment, then extended his hand. Daniels stared at it. Then, slowly, he reached out and shook it. "Apology accepted," Carter said simply. Daniels let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. For the first time in his career, he truly understood what honor meant. Days after the parade, Daniels found himself unable to shake the encounter. Carter's quiet dignity haunted him. One evening, as he patrolled the park, he noticed a homeless man curled up on a bench. He stopped. Instead of reaching for his baton, he crouched down. "Hey, man, you hungry?" The man blinked in surprise. Daniels handed him a sandwich. "Take it." The man hesitated, then accepted it with shaky hands. "Thank you," he whispered. Daniels nodded, standing up. "Stay safe." As he walked away, he felt something unfamiliar. Pride. Not the false kind he had once clung to, but the quiet pride of knowing he had done the right thing. Some lessons were learned the hard way, but they changed you forever. Life has a way of teaching us lessons when we least expect them. Officer Daniels judged without knowing, but in the end, he learned the true meaning of honor and respect. How many times do we make the same mistake, judging others without understanding their struggles? If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs a reminder that kindness and humility go a long way. And tell us in the comments, have you ever misjudged someone only to be proven wrong later? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more powerful stories that make you think, feel, and grow.